Hey guys, in today's video we will be covering a game from round 1, game 2 of the FIDE Grand Prix in Moscow. In this game, Wesley is playing against Duda and Duda only needed to secure a draw to advance to the next round as he had already beaten Wesley So in the first game. But he played a surprising opening here as we shall see, so without further ado let's jump into this game. Wesley opened the game with pawn to e4. Duda played pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense, a fighting opening but one which Duda plays quite frequently, so not really a surprise. Knight to f3, pawn to d6, d4, c takes d4, the open Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, and here g6, going for the dragon, a line which is the total opposite of playing it safe. Perhaps Duda wanted to surprise Wesley. So Wesley played bishop to e3, bishop g7, f3, castles kingside, and queen d2. And this is the mainline dragon. And here both players continued with theoretical lines. Knight to c6, bishop c4, bishop d7, castles queenside, knight to e5, bishop b3, rook to c8, king b1, knight to c4, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, g4, and b5. And this position has been seen many times. White can of course capture this pawn on b5 with his knight, but this is known to give black some initiative. So Wesley decided to play b3, and in the spirit of the dragon, black plays the move b4, offering the exchange. There are 31 games in the database where white accepts the exchange sacrifice, and here Wesley accepts the sacrifice, but in doing so compromises his structure and slightly weakens his king. Queen c7, black is now getting ready to throw everything at the white king. Wesley played g5, which kind of misplaces the knight, knight h5. King to a1, now white aims to defend and prove the material advantage. And king a1 is a nice move which prepares to take control of the b file. White is putting his king in line with his queen and also in line with this bishop, but at the moment there are no immediate ways that black can exploit this. So rook c8, black hopes to put more pressure on c4 and regain the pawn. Rook to b1, bishop e6, and here the knight is pinned, so knight takes bishop isn't possible. So rook to b2, preparing to double the rooks. We have bishop takes c4, the pawns are now equal, and black is down the exchange. So rook h to b1, pawn to d5. So pawn to d5 attempts to break up white's center and perhaps bring the stranded knight back into the game. Duda was still in his preparation at this point of the game, and Wesley spent approximately 20 minutes for the next two moves. And here he played a novelty, e takes d5. Previously rook b7 has been played. And Duda played knight to f4, so black's idea behind d5 is just to activate the knight. And the threat of taking on d5 is now pretty annoying. Now if bishop takes f4, this would be a bad move because after queen takes f4, white would have to defend this pinned knight. Say rook to d1 and simply queen takes g5, and black is perhaps better in this position due to the weak pawns and also the problems faced on this long diagonal. So going back to knight to f4, now at this stage of the game Wesley was well down on the clock, having 35 minutes compared to Duda's 1 hour and 13 minutes. So Duda definitely managed to surprise Wesley. But here Wesley managed to formulate a very nice plan. Rook to b7 from Wesley. So Wesley spent a good 10 minutes on this move, but his plan is very effective. Queen to e5, and here rook 1 to b4. So a great move from Wesley, which basically forces black into an inferior ending. So the bishop here is pinned. The only decent continuation is to play knight takes d5, which forks the queen and rook. And here Wesley played rook takes c4, the whole point behind rook to b4. So black's back rank is pretty weak if knight captures queen, then rook takes c8 with check, bishop to f8, and here rook b to b8 is decisive. If queen takes e3, then rook takes f8 and rook to g8 mate. So after rook takes c4, Duda played rook to f8. Black is basically down a whole rook in this position, but he does have some pressure on the knight and on the bishop. So white should make his next move count, and Wesley does with the move rook c5. And rook c5 keeps the advantage. So here if queen takes bishop, and after queen takes queen, knight takes queen, pawn to c3, just protecting this knight, black is simply down the exchange in this ending. So after rook c5, black once again doesn't have the luxury of playing a consolidating move like pawn to e6, since he is down so much material, so he has to go for knight takes c3. And we have a forcing sequence of exchanges. Rook takes queen, bishop takes rook, knight to c6, bishop g7. So Wesley has given back the material, but he has evaluated that after bishop takes a7, that he has a better position. So with the a-pawn eliminated, white has a very clear plan of simply pushing his own a-pawn. And black does not have a decisive discovered check with his knight. So now Duda played pawn to e5. Black's only hope for counterplay is to open up the e-file for some rook activity. So king to b2 from Wesley, we have pawn to e4, f takes e4, and knight takes e4 with check, king to b3. And in this position, Wesley has a significant advantage because his pawns are simply much quicker. And black's pawns are temporarily locked down because of this pawn on g5. If knight takes g5, white pushes a4 and he is ahead in the race. For example, f5, pawn to a5, f4, pawn to a6, f3, bishop b6, f2, bishop takes f2, rook takes f2, pawn to a7, rook f3 check, simply king a2, and this pawn is going to promote. So after king b3, Duda played rook e8, we have pawn to a4, rook to e6, knight to d4, and rook to a6. So Duda has to put up some resistance against that pawn. And now Wesley played rook to b8 check, a nice little intermezzo, just putting black in an awkward pin, bishop f8, and bishop b6. So Wesley simply takes advantage of this awkwardly placed rook, and it is now trapped. So Duda played king g7, unpinning. We have pawn to a5, and that rook will soon be won, possibly by this knight. Bishop d6, rook to e8, pawn to f5, simply protecting that knight. We have g takes f6, en passant with check. Knight takes f6, rook to d8. Wesley maintains control of the a8 square, and this rook on a6 is going nowhere. So we have bishop takes h2, knight to e6 check, king to f7, knight to c5, winning the exchange. Duda plays rook takes bishop, we have a takes b6, and the rest of the game is just a matter of technique from Wesley. Here h5 from Duda, pawn to b7, h4. Now it's possible to just promote the pawn, but Wesley in this position plays rook d2. Now I believe the reason he did this is just to limit any counterplay from black's kingside pawns. So in the game bishop c7 played. If bishop g3, then probably rook d3, threatening just to capture that bishop and promote the pawn. If bishop b8, then knight to a6, bishop e5. So promoting wins, but here c4 is very effective, simply pushing that pawn and limiting any counterplay from black. So if instead of bishop g3, if say bishop f4, then white goes rook to f2, and after the bishop retreats, then knight to e4, attacking the pinned knight. If bishop e5, then rook f2, again threatening to attack the pinned piece with knight d7. And if king g7, stepping out of the pin, then we have a nice tactic in rook takes f6. And after king takes f6, you can't play bishop takes rook because of b8 queen. So After king takes, knight d7 check, knight takes bishop, and b8 queen. And if bishop to b8, then rook f2 with the same idea. So going back to the game, Duda played, sorry about that, we are at rook to d2. Duda played bishop c7. And now knight to e4 is a nice move to just simplify the position. So if knight takes knight, then white's idea is simply rook d7 check, followed by taking the bishop. So after knight to e4, king to e6 was played. We have knight takes knight, king takes knight, and rook d7, good fundamentals, simply getting ready to position his rook behind the passed pawn. Bishop g3 from Duda, rook to h7, g5, king to c4, king to f5, king to d3, and Wesley has everything under control. After positioning his king on the king side, white will win the game with his connected passers. So king to g4 from Duda, king to e2, king to h3, and here's c4. So that pawn is starting to roll. King g2, rook h5. And in this position, Jan-Christoph Duda resigned. So black does not have a decent continuation. If he plays bishop f4, trying to defend that pawn, simply rook takes g5 check, and this bishop is overloaded. And if g4, then rook takes h4, followed by rook takes g4, and white is winning. Very impressive win by Wesley. Duda definitely surprised him with the opening choice, but Wesley kept his cool, found the right plans and continuation, and possibly in the process refuting this line of black sacrificing the exchange. So Wesley survives elimination, and the round will be decided in the tiebreaks. So I hope you enjoyed this game. If you like the content, consider giving this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.